Okay, so how exactly did one indie director permanently rewire the way we tell stories? And I'm talking about a shift that completely changed everything, from massive IMAX screen blockbusters all the way down to those zero-budget videos you scroll past on your phone. Today in this explainer, we're unpacking a cinematic ripple effect that completely redefined how audiences process time, narrative, and tension. We're going to start with a pretty massive question that bridges the gap between 90s cinema and the pop culture we consume today. Because look, on the surface, a gritty 90s crime film, a terrifying modern analog horror video on the internet, and an upcoming $250 million Hollywood blockbuster seem to have absolutely nothing in common. But the crazy thing is, they all share the exact same structural DNA. And this brilliant insight from director Christopher Nolan really gives us our answer. He points out that before 1994, Hollywood essentially forced movies to play linearly, A to B to C. They were completely locked into what he calls chronological conservatism, mostly just so they could easily be sold and understood on television. That was the unbreakable rule of the industry. Well, until Quentin Tarantino arrived and literally ended it. So to really understand this massive shift, we have to look at what this whole 90s indie wave actually invented. Critics actually coined a term for it, the Tarantino effect. It was this brand new Hollywood language characterized by totally scrambled timelines, hyper-stylized aesthetics, and just weaving these deep-cut movie homages straight into the story. He took the kind of super niche cinephile trivia you'd only know if you worked at a local video store and made it undeniably cool and mainstream. To put that into perspective, back in 1992, his debut film Reservoir Dogs was made for just $1.2 million. I mean, with a tiny fraction of a typical studio budget, he proved you could build an absolute cult hit, essentially by just having guys in cheap thrift store suits talk to each other in an empty warehouse. It completely shattered the illusion that you needed massive funding to make a real cinematic impact. He essentially built a replicatable cheat code for filmmaking. First off, he proved audiences actually love non-linear, scrambled timelines. We like putting the puzzle together. Second, he used 10 straight minutes of dialogue to build the kind of nail-biting suspense usually reserved for giant action sequences. And third, he mashed up crazy, obscure genres. You mix some Hong Kong action with spaghetti westerns, toss in some super catchy pop culture needle drops, and boom, you've got the modern indie to Hollywood pipeline. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway that every future creator learned from him. You don't need money. You need a point of view. If you have a distinct, slightly obsessive authorial voice, you can literally compete with the biggest studios in the world. Now, this ripple effect didn't just stay in the underground indie scene. It went straight to the very top of Hollywood royalty. Just take a look at this crazy timeline, because there is a direct, undeniable path of mentorship here. It starts back in 1994 with a 24-year-old Christopher Nolan working as an intern, reading the Pulp Fiction script. That experience directly informs his own 2000 breakout hit, Memento, which famously plays out in reverse. And from there, Nolan spends 2 decades mastering time inversion in massive epics like Inception and Dunkirk, leading straight to his upcoming 2026 mega project. See, Nolan wasn't just casually watching these movies, right? He was an active student. He's openly stated how absolutely fascinated he was with what Tarantino pulled off. He realized that traditional linear storytelling was dead, and more importantly, that audiences were smart enough to piece together fragmented narratives as long as the director had the confidence to guide them. Which actually brings us to where this whole storytelling technique is landing today, at the absolute pinnacle of big-budget filmmaking. Check out this staggering figure. That is the $250 million budget for Nolan's 2026 adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey. We're talking about a gargantuan production featuring A-listers like Matt Damon and Zendaya. This is the Tarantino indie effect scaled to the maximum possible Hollywood extreme.
The technological scale they're deploying here is just wild. This is going to be the first film ever shot entirely on massive IMAX 70mm film cameras, spanning across global locations like Morocco, Greece, Italy, and Iceland. Yet beneath all this bleeding-edge tech and massive scope, the foundational narrative structure relies entirely on the storytelling tricks popularized in a gritty 90s indie flick. But here's the really fascinating twist. Nolan connects this high-tech epic right back to the distant past. He points out that novels, plays, and even Homer's original Greek myths never insisted on purely chronological information. Ancient audiences experienced myth in fragments, way out of order. He reminds us that non-linear storytelling isn't just some cool modern gimmick. It's literally how human beings have always naturally told stories. So we can track this evolution perfectly.
Nolan recognized that Homer's The Odyssey is basically the original nonlinear narrative. But to figure out how to translate that ancient myth to a modern screen, he took the cinematic license that Tarantino fought for in the 90s. He's using the Tarantino playbook to film the literal first nonlinear story ever told. But you know what's wild? This effect didn't just scale up to IMAX, it also went completely underground.
A whole new generation of zero-budget internet creators, the ones making backrooms videos or analog horror on TikTok, stole this exact blueprint. They figured out that if you combine a low budget with a really strong authorial voice, rely heavily on pastiche, and just obsess over a hyper-niche topic, you can engineer a massive cult hit. They learned how to become major authors with absolutely nothing.
It's the golden rule of indie creation. Make your limitation your style. Tarantino had zero money, so he shot guys in an empty warehouse for Reservoir Dogs. Modern analog horror creators have zero money, so they shoot the backrooms in empty, fluorescent-lit office spaces. They take whatever cheap, liminal space they have access to and elevate it into a totally iconic aesthetic. And then there's the obsession with obscure references. Tarantino made movies that were fundamentally about being obsessed with old films, constantly referencing obscure kung fu and 70s cinema. Well, modern internet creators do the exact same thing for the digital age. They make videos obsessed with forgotten internet aesthetics, lost media, and the blocky graphics of old PS1 games. The reference itself becomes a story. This is honestly the biggest lesson these internet creators absorbed. You do not need explosive, multi-million-dollar special effects to scare the living daylights out of people. 10 minutes of people just talking in a room can be utterly terrifying if the writing is sharp and the tension is well-crafted. And the best part? That costs exactly $0 to film.
Okay, let's bring this whole explainer full circle to really lock in the impact of this formula. Think about it like this. The Beatles didn't invent music, obviously, but they completely engineered what we now understand as the modern pop album. In that exact same way, Tarantino didn't invent out-of-order storytelling, but he completely re-engineered how audiences process narrative time. He proved that jumping through time wasn't just for, stuffy avant-garde art films. It could be the biggest, most exciting blockbuster in the world.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. If a movie-obsessed video store clerk in the 90s could build a blueprint so powerful that it shapes a massive IMAX epic directed by Christopher Nolan, while simultaneously arming a whole generation of TikTok creators with the tools to terrify us, who is out there right now with zero budget and a crazy idea about to invent the next blueprint? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.